Today my message is Until Christ Formed in You. Galatians chapter 4 verse 19. My dear children, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth, until Christ is formed in you. Thus far, in the book of Galatians, Paul has stressed that we are saved only by faith in Christ, not by observing the law. Although we are saved by the faith in Christ, we are still vulnerable to bad influence and false teachings. Paul was a good shepherd for the Galatians. Paul had a great zeal for Christ and for them. He didn't abandon them even though they treated him like an enemy. Rather, he was willing to suffer even more for them until they grow to maturity. This is the image of Christ, who is our good shepherd. Today, let's realize that though we are saved by faith in Christ alone, we need to grow to maturity. Paul's zeal for Christ to be formed in the Galatians. In verse 19, he calls them, my dear children. It means that Paul had borne the pains of childbirth for them and was their spiritual mother. First, Paul rebuked them for returning to slavery. In verses 9 and 9a, Paul reminded them of what kind of slaves they had been and helped them to see their present situation. Generally, people think that if they believe in God, they will lose their freedom and become like slaves. But the opposite side is true. They worship inanimate objects such as the sun, moon and stars, mountains, trees and rocks. They also worship animals, cows, eagles, and snakes, as well as Greek and Roman mythical figures. They feared that if they did not worship these idols, disaster would come upon them. Romans chapter 1, verse 18 through 32. tells us the result is that their thinking becomes futile and their foolish hearts are darkened. They become slaves of evil desires and terrible immortality. When they spawn a totally deprived society. When the Galatians received the gospel, they escaped from miserable slavery to idols. Through the gospel, they came to know God as their creator, their father, and their true object of worship. In God, they enjoyed the true satisfaction of their souls and real freedom. More fundamentally, they were known by God. It was God who sought them and found them. It was God who took the initiative for their salvation. Now God looked upon them as his dear children with love and affection. This gave them a glorious identity, unshakable security. and an eternal inheritance. In verse 9b, Paul rebuked them, saying, "How is it that you are going back to those weak and immeasurable forces? Do you wish to be enslaved by them all over again?" Here, weak and miserable forces refer to the rituals of Judaism, such as observing special days, months, seasons, and years. Many people think that Christian life is a matter of following rituals. When they follow well, they become proud, self-righteousness, and argumentative, but when they fail, they despair and fall into condemnation and lose their joy of life. Jewish ritualism was a feeling because it seemed to be biblical, but actually it was similar to the bondage they had experienced when they worshipped idols. It was the same bondage, but a different form. Paul did not want them to return to slavery and experience the awful consequences of abandoning the living God. So he rebuked them severely out of his great shepherd's heart. At the time he rebuked them, Paul felt afraid and had a sense of futility. Sometimes we feel like for thee. We work hard to serve God's sheep with the Word of God, prayers, counseling, delicious food, and so on, so they can grow in Christ. Then through a false teacher or a bad influence, they suddenly change, become crazy. They have become slaves of Satan. By the time we recover from shock, we realize that we are powerless and don't know how to help them. It is easy to give up. What did Paul do? Second, Paul pleaded to restore their love relationship. Let's read verse 28. "I plead with you, brothers and sisters, become like me, for I become like you." Until now, Paul had spoken with apostolic authority and given the Galatians sound biblical doctrine to help them break free from Jewish legalism. But here, pleads with them on the basis of their love relationship. Plead means to appeal earnestly and humbly. Though Paul was a great servant of God, he humbled himself to plead with them. Paul's plea was, "Become like me, for I become like you." It was amazing that Paul became like the Gentiles. Paul, before knowing God Christ, he was extremely jealous for the tradition of Judaism. At that time, he had the typical Jewish prejudice toward the Gentiles. But when he came to know God through meeting the risen Christ, he was set free from Jewish legalism. He found true life, joy, and peace. He realized that knowing Christ and helping others to know Christ was everything. He began to put aside any barrier that would hinder others from seeing Christ in him. He became all things to all men in order to win them over to Christ. This experienced the incarnation of Christ. Christ left the glorious kingdom of heaven to come into this broken world, to become like us. We learn here that shepherds must be humble like Christ and like Paul. We should be able to say to those in our mission fields, I became like you. The irony is that the Gentiles wanted to be what Paul had been before he knew Christ. So he pleaded with them, become like me. When Paul first preached the gospel to them, he was ill. But one thing is clear, Paul's physical illness could have been a temptation to the Gentiles. They could have seen him with contempt and rejected his message. However, they received Paul as if he were an angel of God. They were even willing to tear out their eyes and give them to Paul. When they received the gospel, Paul's illness did not matter to them. They loved him and respected him and had a great joy in Jesus. But with they turned to Jewish legalism, they lost their joy and considered Paul an enemy because he rebuked them with truth to help them to live in Christ's grace. Here we learn that our attitude toward the shepherds and mentors in Christ is a barometer of our spiritual condition. When we have the gospel in our hearts, we love God's servants even if they have serious weakness. Then our relationships with God's servants will also be restored and we can have peace. Third, Paul's zeal to win them over to Christ. In verse 17, Paul exposed the Judaizers' evil motive and purpose. Outwardly, they looked noble, spoke well, and seemed very pious, quoting many Bible verses, and they were jealous. So people admired them, but their intention was to destroy the love relationship between Paul and Galatians. They planted doubts about Paul's message, apostleship, character. Their purpose was to alienate the Galatians from Paul, to make Galatians their own disciples. When the Galatians heard the Judaizers' teaching, they accepted it without discerning the motive and purpose behind it. They invited bad influence which damaged the work of God among them. Elijah changed Baal worshippers and won the great victory. He said, I have been very jealous for the Lord God Almighty. When Jesus was cleansing the temple, his disciples remembered the words, Jehovah, your house will consume me.